Yo, what's going on, guys? Kuru here. Thanks for tuning in today. This is going to be my first real video that's not just straight gameplay rips from Twitch, so just bear with me as I learn how to do this whole YouTube thing. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. You can find me on Twitch as well, but basically today I just wanted to make a quick video about Shadow Priests and kind of how they play out in dungeon content. I can see based on some of the analytics from YouTube on the videos that I've posted recently of my just gameplay rips from Mythic Zeros the past couple weeks, that people are searching up Shadow Priest dungeons and Shadow Priest Mythic Zeros and finding some of my gameplay videos. So hopefully this will be helpful for those of you who are looking for some pointers on playing Shadow Priests in 5-man content. For starters, I wanted to talk about gear very briefly. Generally speaking, eye level is always going to be king. If something drops for you and it has a higher item level, at this point you should probably just be equipping that. The exception may be trinkets, depending on how useful they are. For trinkets, generally one on-use trinket is fine, but you wouldn't typically want to, just because that could, be a weird interaction with your rotation. The Dark Moon deck trinket is pretty strong right now, but may be expensive based on your server, so buy that at your own discretion. I've bought one just because I had a whole bunch of extra gold lying around, but it may be a different situation for you. When you get to a point, though, where a lot of your pieces end up being the same item level, you'll want to lean more into haste on those same item level items. Of course, as most people will tell you, you should be simming yourself to find out what is the best for you. The way you do this, you just download the Simulation Craft add-on, type /simc in game, copy the data extract out of there, and just paste it into raid bots into a Top Gear sim, select what you want to sim, and send it on its way. When simming, just make sure you aren't looking solely at patchwork style fights. That's a trap that a lot of people will fall into. It's not really that realistic of a simulation. Something even just as simple as changing that to light or heavy movement, generally speaking, will be more realistic. The dungeon slice sim is also still kind of in a beta situation, so that may not really be as accurate either, but there are plenty of other videos out there on how to accurately sim your character, so I'm not going to cover that here, but generally speaking, light, heavy movement, something like that will be more realistic than just pure patchwork, although if you want to look at that, just see what your numbers are at the very top end, feel free to do that. Moving on to talents that I've got pulled up here. I've tried a couple of builds in the last couple of weeks since Shadowlands launched, since pre-patch went live. And this setup right here is generally what I've found to be pretty fun, and overall just really solid damage throughout the course of a dungeon. This is what I'm going to be running in the majority of the time, so again, I'm going to go over the talents and talk about why I'm using some of these. So, a quick rundown, starting with Death and Madness, Body and Soul, Searing Nightmare, Last Word, Auspicious Spirits, Mindbender, and Surrender to Madness. Death and Madness is very strong for keeping your insanity generation rolling between packs, so that you can immediately start dishing out those Searing Nightmares that we'll talk about in just a moment. Typically what you want to do is snipe out a couple Shadow Word deaths on some dying mobs to give you a nice insanity boost going into the next pack, or even carrying that into an upcoming boss fight. It's just a really strong talent here, and something that I'll likely be using for both Fortified and Tyrannical weeks. Next up is Body and Soul. Generally speaking, this is just going to be the default choice overall. It gives us a bit of movement, which is sorely needed at times in our kit, versus the other two talents here not being quite as useful, but there are certain use cases for those. Next up, we have Searing Nightmare. This is going to be a very big ability for dungeons. Misery might be worth taking later on in the expansion as we continue to scale up, but right now, Searing Nightmare is definitely going to be the go-to choice. This gives us a big boost in terms of our AoE damage because it's still one of the few abilities left in the game that doesn't have a target cap. So what that means is that it's going to hit everything near your target, and it will apply Shadow Word Pain to all those targets that it hits. So overall, just a very strong talent here, and we'll talk about its usage a little more when we look at the rotation. Generally speaking, in the 35 talent row, I'm going to be taking Last Word. The cooldown reduction on our Interrupt, again, is something that is sorely needed based on our base kit. Mind Bomb and Psychic Core will likely still get some playtime and be used for some groups depending on the comp, but generally speaking, getting that cooldown reduction on your silence is the way to go. For the level 40 row, some guides will suggest to use Shadow Crash. I personally don't like the spell that much, so I'm going to be using Auspicious Spirits. Auspicious Spirits will also likely be a higher net increase for things like tyrannical bosses as well. But basically for me, it comes down to the fact that Auspicious Spirits is a passive effect and Shadow Crash is another spell, another button that we have to work into the rotation. Typically we have enough buttons to be pressing. We have enough insanity generation to be just dumping a lot of that into Searing Nightmare. So we don't really need another spell like Shadow Crash for our rotation for dungeons. But again, that's just a personal taste for me. You may enjoy the spell, and I'm sure that again, it'll be another thing that gets a lot of playtime and sees some usefulness in some groups. Next up, we have Mindbender. This is also a go-to talent for dungeons. It's basically a better Shadow Fiend with a shorter cooldown. And can certainly help with insanity generation throughout the course of the dungeons. Finally, wrapping this up in the last row, I've been having a ton of fun with Surrender to Madness. Now, I was somebody who was probably like a lot of other people, was very nervous about killing myself, but honestly, what I found is that 25 seconds ends up being quite a long time, and the likelihood of you killing yourself on a trash pack or even if you use it correctly on a boss is pretty slim. In terms of usage of this talent, the main usefulness comes from the free void form rather than the insanity generation. With this build, again, insanity shouldn't be too much of a problem, especially with Death and Madness and a 1-minute Mindbender. So you shouldn't be running into too much of an issue there. The free void form basically means that you can use Void Eruption on one pack and then turn around and use Surrender to Madness on the next pack. And you're able to kind of keep those void forms rolling from pack to pack and into the bosses. That way your Void Eruption will be back up pretty soon after you use Surrender to Madness. It gives you a lot less downtime from one void form to the next, and again, this is going to help your damage in the long run over the course of a dungeon. Also, if you play your cards right, you can use this on bosses as well, and essentially you would use Void Eruption with your cooldowns and everything early on in the fight, and then cast Surrender to Madness later on to get another void form and really start to push those damage meters. I mean, honestly, who doesn't want to do big fat deeps, right? Just, again, do this with a grain of salt. Be careful not to kill yourself. If you're still not comfortable with Surrender to Madness, you can always take something like Hungering Void. Still a very strong talent, especially for single target. And it gets you into some of those longer void forms, which is pretty nice as well. That pretty much does it for talents. So let's talk about the rotation a bit. For our AoE rotation, there are certain breakpoints where we want to start dropping spells like Devouring Plague and Mind Blast out of the rotation. Basically, from 1 to 3 targets, you'll still want to dot everything up like normal with Vampiric Touch. You'll still use Devouring Plague as your main spender, and you'll still cast Mind Blast on cooldown whenever you can. Even getting those Dark Thoughts procs, you'll still want to do that as you normally would. Once you get to that 4 target point, that's where you're going to stop spending Insanity with Devouring Plague and instead switch over to using Searing Nightmare. At 4 targets, you'll also want to stop casting Mind Blast unless you get a free cast proc with Dark Thoughts. Generally speaking, you can also go ahead and use Vampiric Touch as well on up to 4 targets. It gives you some of that extra Insanity generation, and for those Dark Thought procs, it gives you a little bit more damage, especially with your Auspicious Spirits talents here. At 5 targets, this is where things start to get pretty spicy. At this point, you'll want to stop casting Void Bolt when you're in Void form, and you'll also stop applying Vampiric Touch unless you really need more Insanity. Which again, hopefully, as long as things are rolling and lining up well with Mindbender and Death and Madness, you won't really have to worry about that too much. The single target rotation for bosses will remain pretty much the same, and there's just a couple things to note here. If there are adds in the fight, then feel free to throw Searing Nightmare into rotation if you can. You can also dot those adds up with Vampiric Touch if there's not too many of them. Get some extra Insanity generation going, and even try to snipe some of them out with Death and Madness for even more Insanity generation. Like I said when I was talking about Surrender to Madness, again, in terms of the rotation, you can use this on adds that you're pretty sure will die rather quickly to get you into that extra Void form, or you can use it on the boss itself later on in the fight when you know the boss is going to die within that 25 seconds to get you into another Void form. For example, I use this on boss fights all the time, and sometimes I cut it pretty short and cut it pretty close and make myself a little nervous, but it does help on some of those damage meters. You can go look at the last Sanguine Depths run that I did, where I used this pretty effectively. I had about 3 seconds left when we defeated the last boss of that run. So hopefully this guide has been helpful to you, for anybody who's looking for some tips and tricks, some pointers on how to play Shadow Priest in 5-man content. If you have any questions, you have any comments, you have any criticism, feel free to comment down below. Again, I'm pretty new to the whole YouTube thing, so any feedback is certainly welcome. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. That would definitely help me out a ton as I try to grow and put out more content over the course of Shadowlands. Also, feel free to head over to my Twitch. You can follow me there. I'll definitely be streaming a lot as Mythic Plus and rating begin to open up, so be sure to come and say hi and hang out for a little bit. But that does it for me today. Again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.